Hi, this is Steve from East Bay Audio. I was recently watching a video by the brilliant Sarah Carter, and she was discussing the use of bus compressors. She was using Softube's new Tube-Tech Multiband compressor and saying how it gave a more open sounding result compared to SSL style bus compressors. So I thought I'd give it a go, but then I went to the Softube site and saw the price of it. Now I'm not saying it's not worth £250, but I'm sure a lot of us have a few decent compressors and don't really want to have to spend that much on something else. I've experimented with multiband processing before, but the layout and controls can all become a little bit cumbersome. However, a recent update to Reaper 7 makes this a lot more simple, so I thought I'd give it a go again and experiment with some single band compressors I already have. Oh, and if you find this video useful, I'd really appreciate a like, or a subscribe, or even a share. To avoid any copyright strikes, I've got a simple drum mix to play with. I've downloaded a trial of that new Softube plugin and compared it to a few other bus and multiband compressors I have. My usual go-to is a take on the SSL bus compressor, and this is their own version. Then there's the Lindell MBC, their multiband version of the API 2500 bus compressor. I also have the Toneboosters MBC1. That's a great underappreciated tool, but defaults to being very neutral indeed. Now to start building the tool. The simplest way I found to do this is to start with an empty track and add the single band compressor you want to work with. In this case, I'm using Mixwave's DW Fearn VT7. The new Reaper feature I was referring to is a build multi-mono and multi-stereo FX. If you've used the mono option before, you'll know it can create a stereo pair of effects as an FX container chain. But we're going to use the build multi-stereo FX option. If you go ahead and pick that, you'll see it only adds one version of the compressor, which is a bit strange until you realise the number of grouped effects it creates depends upon the number of stereo channels in the track. As this new track only has a stereo pair of channels, it adds one instance of a stereo effect. We need to add as many stereo track channels as we need stereo compressors. In this case, it's going to be a 3-band compressor, so we need 3 stereo channels, 6 in total. With those channels in place on the track, Build Multi-Stereo FX now adds 3 instances of the compressor. Going through these in turn, you see that within the container, each compressor is assigned against subsequent pairs of tracks. The first has channels 1 and 2, the second has 3 and 4, etc. However, if you look at the channel pins for the container itself, we have the complication that the track is expecting to have to deal with 6 channels of audio. As this is going to be used on the final mix 2 bus, we need a way to get this down to 2 channels. The solution in Reaper is to use its multiband processing within the container. The first part is to add the splitter. There are different options. We are going to add a 3-band splitter to the head of the container effects chain. And once that's in place, we can add a 3-band joiner to the tail of the chain. You can see the splitter defaults to take a stereo pair and distribute it to the 6 channels. And it splits the original signal by crossover frequency bands. Lowest to channel 1 and 2, mids to 3 and 4, and highs to 5 and 6. In a similar way, the joiner recombines the 3 bands back into a stereo pair at the end of the chain. And each of the 3 compressor plugins now work with these separate bands, the first instance being set as the primary controller for the various parameters of the other 2. Finally, let's look at the pin and channel settings for the container itself. As the 3-band splitter is distributing the audio from channels 1 and 2, we only need to send audio on channels 1 and 2. And for completeness, the container doesn't even need more than 2 channels anyway. We only use the 6 channels to create the 3 linked compressors. And to double check, even though the container has 2 channels, the compressors are working across the 6 channels now controlled by the splitter and joiner. As the container only has a stereo pair of channels, we can drop this container as an effect on the mix bus, and it won't start adding unwanted channels to that. Now, for simplicity, we'll go through and rename each of the compressors. The first one low, the next mid, and finally high. We'll then go and simplify the name of the container and save the container as an FX chain, so it can then be added to any track in the future, not just this project. Right then, back to this drum project. First we'll go through the compressors we set up. The SSL Bus Compressor does its subtle gluing thing. The Lindell has much more of a box tone, which you can hear with the way it alters the snare. On the other hand, the Toneboosters MBC is much more transparent. Now the Tube-Tech has got its own expensive box tone, and that sounds great. Now it's time to use our multiband compressor. I'll add it to the chain we previously saved to the mix bus and have a play with the setting. You'll see the low band is marked as primary, and so is the one that dictates the settings for the other two. This way you can get identical settings for the three of them. If we break the high band compressor out, just to have both displayed at the same time, you can see changes to the primary low instance drive the changes to the linked high instance too, and it will be the same for the mid one as well. So now we're getting the DW Fearn box tone, but in a multi-band format. If we hit the parameter button on one of the link compressors, we can unlink the parameter controls from the primary instance. This lets us adjust any of the settings just for that band, in this case working on the highs of the drum tracks. We can work the mids separately too. Right, you may have noticed that when we added the DW Fearn chain to the mix bus, there was another one that we'd previously saved. This time it's a Relab 176, but I've got it set up in its mid-side configuration, so we'll have a play with this one. Maybe not something for the mix bus, but we'll start to crush it. Okay, those two compressors we've played with so far don't have external sidechaining options. But what if you wanted to create a multiband compressor with an external sidechain? With Reaper, sidechaining is done via an additional stereo channel pair on that track. So if you need to sidechain, it will need 4 channels, 2 for the track audio and 2 to receive the sidechained feed. This slightly complicates building the container chain, but not by much. Rather than starting off with 6 channels, you need to start off with 8. Then build out with the sidechainable compressor as before. I'm using the new Korneff 1776. By having 8 channels, it will add 4 instances, but we only need 3, so we can delete the final instance sitting on channels 7 and 8. Again, we'll add a 3-band splitter and joiner to the head and tail of the FX chain. Notice that each instance of the compressor has been assigned the channels in the same way, but channels 7 and 8 are now not being used. The next thing is to limit the number of channels available in the container. Before, we cut the channel count down to 2, but this time we're going to limit it to 4, 2 for the audio and 2 for the sidechain feed. We'll have those sidechain channels linked to channels 7 and 8 going to and from the compressors. And now we can go into each of the compressors and assign channels 7 and 8 into their sidechain inputs. We'll save the container chain, and then we can add it to our project to play with the sidechain. The mix bus has channels 3 and 4 fed from the kick drum track. If we open the analyzer on the primary compressor instance and set the view to the external sidechain, you can see the kick drum hits being displayed. We can then have the compression fed from the external sidechain, and you can hear the kick ducking the rest of the kit. Not something you'd really use, rather an example of setting up the sidechain in this multiband implementation. Right, that's about it. If you got this far, it's really appreciated. If you can, a like, a follow, or a share would be really great. Eastway Audio is there to help new or established bands prepare their work for release. If you struggle with final mixes and want a professional sounding final product, we'd love to hear from you. Or even just if you need advice on what to do next, feel free to drop us a line or give us a call. Thanks all.